Well, welcome to the Ole Miss campus, to the National Center for Physical Acoustics, and this week's installment of Unshakable Faith. Why am I coming to you from the front entrance to the NCPA? Well, it's kind of a review of last week, where it says in Hebrews chapter 11, the long section there about Moses, it says he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. How do you see somebody or something that is invisible? Well, we might ask the scientists that work here at NCPA because, well, like a lot of you who are scientists, they spend all their time studying something, sound waves that are invisible. And in many cases, they use sound waves to learn about molecules and gases and other things that are invisible. So we should not think that faith that focuses on the invisible is irrational. In fact, the invisible is a theme of the book of the chapter 11 of Hebrews. You know, in 11:1, where it defines faith, it says it's the substance or the assurance of things we cannot see. It talks about how other heroes of faith were looking ahead to things they couldn't see. It says the world was created out of things that are not visible. The universe was created out of things that are not visible. And so this theme of seeing the unseen, of a faith that doesn't just go on what I can see today, is a big theme in Hebrews 11. And an unshakable faith has to go on, we would call it indirect evidence. Like believing in a virus that has paralyzed the entire world. How many people have seen, you see its picture everywhere in the news media, but where did these pictures come from? That's what I want to know. So it's something that's very hard to see, and none of us have seen it in person, but we have faith, we believe in it. And the same way, God gives us evidence of His activity and of His power, His grace, that we have to accept in the absence of things that are strictly visible. So that's kind of a review of some of the things we talked about last week with regard to Moses. Before we get into a conquering faith, which is today's theme, I want to take a minute and interview somebody that's not from Hebrews chapter 11, but from the Oxford community now in the 21st century, and that will be a sister in our congregation, my biological sister, Ann, and you'll notice we don't have to distance because we share the same space taking care of my mother a great deal these days. So Ann is a wonderful, fascinating person, and I want you to pay attention to this interview. Then we'll get into today's study of Rahab. Welcome to our classroom, Ann. Thank you so much for joining us. I won't tell people about the technical difficulties we've been finding because they probably think I'm a wizard and we don't want to get the truth out. But anyway, tell us about when you became a Christian, Ann. How did your faith journey begin?
Okay. Well, I became a Christian when I was in about 4th grade. I was probably about 10 years old about that time. And it's something that I had been thinking of for a long time. I remember the first time I really began thinking seriously about being baptized was after I went to Camp Wildwood. I went to Camp Wildwood after my 1st grade year, my 2nd grade year, after my 3rd grade year. And as I knew, I enjoyed a lot of great teaching there, a lot of great devotionals and singing, and I met other children my own age who had already made the decision to become Christians, and I really wanted to do that. But the thing that was holding me back more than anything, I think, was the feeling that I had that if I said I wanted to be baptized, then my family would ask me a lot of questions about, what about this, and do you know this, and tell me about what the Bible says about that, because I knew they would want to make sure that I was making the right decision. And I felt really afraid that I wouldn't be able to say the right answers and give the right Bible verses and everything. And so I was very hesitant to do it.
Surprising how many people feel like they need to pass a test of knowledge before they're baptized.
But I wasn't very old. I didn't know that was something that most people, many, even grown-up people have trouble with or think or have those feelings about. So I remember very carefully designing it to be a secret. and I didn't tell anybody about it, and I was afraid about going down front in front of everybody, so I did it on a Wednesday night. And I knew I wanted my daddy to baptize me, and that was really, really important to me. And so I went down front, and I believe it was probably David Chadwell that I talked to, and wanted my daddy to baptize me. So, that was the beginning of it all, and kind of the story of where I started.
Well, that's been a long time ago. So looking back, what is really the foundation of your faith? If you met a new friend and we're just kind of getting acquainted with the person, they'd say, why is it that you are so worked into this Christian thing? What's your faith based on? What would you say?
Well, I think one point that I would make is that as I have lived life and grown in knowledge and in experience, probably my explanation on that would change some. I think that when I first began, it was very, very important to me to be obedient, to do the right thing so I wouldn't get punished. And that's a very appropriate for that age person to feel that way. That's right on track with, stages of moral maturity. But as I've gotten older, I feel like my faith is based more upon my knowledge that, and my belief in the divinity of Jesus Christ, his coming to earth and living and being willing to die for my sins, and God's resurrection of him from the dead, which conquers death and sin and empowers me to have the Holy Spirit. So that right there is how I get up and function in the mornings. That's why I can pray and know that God's power is at work in things that seem insurmountable obstacles.
Well, you've got a firm foundation for your faith, but one thing we've learned from studying Hebrews 11 is that these heroes of faith had some major trials. And so, being as general or as specific as you want to, can you tell us about what you would consider to be the greatest trial your faith has undergone?
Yeah, I think the game changer for me and the biggest trial of my faith was undoubtedly during the divorce and breakup of my marriage. I was completely blindsided by that. It was something that I knew that was never going to happen to me. It was no matter what, that would never happen to me. And I felt like that if you do right, then good things happen to you because you're doing the right things. But now I know that trials come to everybody, and that God uses those to draw us closer to him. It's not that God would never will it to happen, but he's sure going to use everything that Satan and evil put in his way to work his will, which is relationship with us.
Well, that was really a huge trial for you, I'm sure. What sort of things do you think from the time that you were very young and became a Christian until you encountered that huge trial that strengthened you to where your faith withstood it?
Well, I think that certainly, the bedrock of my faith was there. But I also feel like I had gotten to a point where I was not going to be able to grow much until I changed some assumptions that I had about faith and about God and about myself. So, I think that the trial itself worked to strengthen my faith, if that is okay to say. I do feel very strongly that that's not God's will that happened to me.
Well, I know that a lot of people, when they encounter marriage difficulties in particular, drop out of church, and that's a huge crisis for their faith, and sometimes their faith doesn't survive. What happened to you during that period that strengthened and sustained you? What did you do, or what did others do for you that kept you going?
Well, I definitely identify with that. When you go through something like I went through, I'm not sure what other people go through on different subjects, but with this particular thing, I felt like a completely different person. I didn't feel like I belonged at church anymore. I felt like it was a club for the people who belonged, and I wasn't in the club anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that helped was that I had this habit that had been ingrained in me for a long time, and I knew that I believed that that I could see clearly later, even if I couldn't see clearly right now, and that meanwhile I was just going to keep on doing the thing I knew was the right thing, no matter if it felt right or not. I was just going to do it. In other words, I was bound and determined to show up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was just going to grit my teeth and show up.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. I was going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then God was going to have to figure it out, but I was going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really important to me to continue that. And I think it was very important to me, and it has ended up being true, that it was important for me to do it even when I didn't feel like doing it, even when I didn't want to do it, because I wanted my kids to have it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a really, really important thing for my family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's really great, Ann.
Oh, I forgot to say one more thing.
Good.
I think I had so many good friends that carried me.
Mm-hmm.
I often asked people to pray for me because I couldn't pray.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just ask them to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And I had so many good friends that just walked along with me and prayed for me, and, you know, in their own ways, they befriended me. And, you know, you can't make it go away, and you can't make it better, but you can be not alone.
Thank you so much for that observation. That is a real help to all of us, and puts flesh and blood on so many of the great things we're learning about faith in the lives of Hebrews chapter 11. So thank you for being with our class, Ann.
Thank you
Great
for having
interview,
me.
the third time with Charles.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, here we are again on the Ole Miss campus. Do you know where I am? I'm in the entrance to the old Tad Pad, the old basketball coliseum. And the reason I'm here is because this is a Hall of Fame, and we're studying Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of the faithful. And one thing about Hebrews chapter 11 and this Hall of Fame is most of the recognition is for individuals, great individuals here, heroes in sports at Ole Miss. This is one of my favorite right here, Donnie Kessinger, who back in the early 60s was All-American in baseball and basketball. He later on became a professional baseball player and played for 15 years, and then he was a coach at Ole Miss and won the first SEC tournament at Ole Miss in 1977 as a coach. And he and his family still live in Oxford and run a real estate business, and you see him around town sometimes. So a great sports hero. But the Hall of Fame we're studying is not about sports heroes, it's about faith heroes. And like this Hall of Fame, it's mostly about individuals, but there are a couple of team mentions in Hebrews 11. No team mentions here in the Tad Pad, but there are some team mentions in the book of Hebrews. The verse we had last week, or the passage we had last week, talks about how the people went through the Red Sea by faith, that God parted the waters for them, and even though it was against their intuition, they stepped out and crossed on dry land with water on either side of them. And the Egyptians tried to do the same. They were drowned. And then it talks about how God told them, okay, you want to take the city of Jericho. It has big, thick walls. What I want you to do is to walk around it once a day, every day, for 6 days. What good is that going to do, walking around the outside of a wall? And if we're doing that, won't the other people around, won't they attack us? I mean, don't we need to go ahead and get this done real quick before somebody else comes and attacks us? Well, no, this is what God said to do. So this is what they did. The seventh day, they went around 7 times, and then they gave a great shout. Had to be silent for 6 days, but on the 7th day, after the 7th trip around, they gave a great shout. The walls fell, and they went in
and took the city. So all the people had to work together. In our spiritual life as Christians, sometimes we're called upon to do great things as an individual, but Christianity is very much a team sport. And when someone is baptized and matures into a disciple, usually there are a whole lot of people that are involved in influencing, encouraging, and helping that person mature. So it's very much a team sport. We're called to be together in a body. And so it's great that Hebrews 11 it has at least these two recognitions, and there's some others where people working together as a group are recognized.
For the remainder of our lesson today, I'd like to focus on just one verse out of Hebrews chapter 11 and one character. And that verse is verse 31, and it's in the box on your sheet. And I encourage you to print out the handout each week that is usually attached to the email you get about this class, and you can follow along. You don't have to look up the different scriptures; they're all here for you. I hope you enjoy hearing the birds as much as I do. Anyway, this character is verse 31. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Well, if you're paying attention and you get to this verse in the Faith Hall of Fame, your mind is completely blown. What is Rahab doing in the Faith Hall of Fame? You know, when we think about halls of fame in our culture, American culture, we think about, as I've already alluded to today, the greatest sports hall of fame of all is the one in Cooperstown, New York, the Baseball Hall of Fame. That is the oldest, that's the one that everybody thinks of first. We think about Hall of Fame. And one of the greatest baseball players of my lifetime, indeed of all time, is the great Pete Rose. He's an old man now. But among many things that Pete Rose did is he has more hits, over 4,000 some odd hits. But he'll never get into the Hall of Fame because he has one big strike against him, if you'll pardon the pun, and that is he gambled on baseball, which is a really no-no. It's strictly against all rules, all regulations, all conventions, all traditions. Professional baseball players are not allowed to bet on their games, and he did. And so for this reason, despite the fact that on the field he was the greatest, he'll never get into the Hall of Fame. Well, Rahab didn't have just one strike against her. She had 3 strikes against her that ought to keep her out of this Hall of Fame. First of all, she's a woman. You say, what? Wait. Doesn't God love women too? Yes, God loves women too. But the role that they play in the Bible is not so much a leadership role as far as men and women go. And there's some good reasons for that. So if you're keeping score, and maybe you are, maybe you're not, she's only the 3rd woman broadly defined that we've run into so far. We talked about Sarah, Moses' parents. Well, one of those was a woman. Her name's not given. Her name was Jochebed, and what she did was heroic and showed great faith. But just talks about Moses' parents. You know, they hid him, and now we come to Rahab. So she's you know, in pretty rarefied atmosphere here, being only the 2nd woman mentioned by name in the Hall of Fame. So, you know, that was kind of a strike against. The bigger strike against her, though, is she's not one of God's chosen people. She's not a Jew. She's a Canaanite, an Amorite, a pagan. And you know, in the Old Testament, it's all about being part of God's chosen people. Well, she ain't, buddy. She's very much from a very pagan culture. She's right there in the middle of Jericho. But the biggest deal is just what it says here. It says, by faith, the prostitute. Did you get that? The prostitute Rahab. Now, this word prostitute, when we go back to the book of Joshua, we meet Rahab in Joshua 2 and again in Joshua 6. And so this has been translated various ways. Most of the translations come out and call her either a harlot or a prostitute. Some people say, well, that word that we translate harlot or prostitute, you could translate that innkeeper, a woman that, you know, that operates a lodging business. And maybe that's what she did, but I think in that pagan culture, you know, a house of prostitution and a lodging business were kind of the same thing, if you get what I mean. You know, and still in places of temporary lodging, there's opportunities for various kinds of sexual immorality, even in our culture. And
so she doesn't have a resume just on the face of it that's a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame. So what it says, though, is that she welcomed the spies. Welcomed the spies. Now, what does this mean? And so again, you review the accounts in Joshua 2 and Joshua 6. And what had happened is the children of Israel were getting ready to conquer the Promised Land, modern-day Israel, Jordan. And so they had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and they were getting ready to go in, and they'd already conquered a lot of the territory on the east side of the Jordan? Yeah, the east side of the Jordan, which is called, the east side of the Jordan. I get the West Bank thing we talk about today mixed up, but this was that they'd conquered the east side of the Jordan. They were getting ready to cross the Jordan and take the city of Jericho. So Moses sent some spies to check out things in Jericho. And the king of Jericho found out the spies were there, and they went to Rahab's house, and she hid them. It wasn't just like she said, welcome, special tonight for spies, come on in, we'll give you the deluxe suite, you won't have to pay for movies on TV, room service, come on in, spies. That wasn't the kind of welcome it's talking about here. It says she took them up on the roof and hid them under stalks of flax. Flax is the plant, of course, that linen cloth is made out of. And so when the soldiers came from the king, she said, oh, they were here, but they left. They went somewhere. They went out the gate. I don't know what direction they went in, but if you'll hurry, maybe you can catch them. So she really saved their lives. And so this is what gets her in the Hall of Fame. What gets her in the Hall of Fame is the statement that she made about her motive for essentially betraying her own culture, betraying her own people. And it's kind of like if you think about your country, what the biggest enemy your country has, and if spies came from that enemy to your country and you tried to help them out, why would you do something like that? I wouldn't do something like that if I knew there were people that were trying to destroy the United States of America. Spies, I wouldn't help them out. I'd report them, but no. Rahab decides that she's going to help them out, and so her reason for doing this is spelled out in Joshua 2, 8 through 11, which is on your sheet. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them. Now, here Rahab takes off her prostitute hat and puts on her faith hat. I'm going to say she puts on her theologian hat, because this is really profound what she says. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. First of all, Rahab cites the evidence that she did have. She couldn't see God. In fact, she hadn't directly seen with her own eyes these things that she recites, but she had credible accounts, just like you and I have credible accounts. She had credible accounts, she had evidence, and then she reasoned from that evidence that this God of the Hebrews, this God of the Israelites, was different from all the gods that she had heard about, that she had been taught to worship, in two respects. First of all, he was real. And secondly, he transcended place. You know, the ancient Canaanites had this idea that there were different gods. There was a god of their city, a god of their field, a god of this hill. And then if you get on the next hill, or the next city, or the next city-state, the next country, there'd be some other god over there. and that gods were tied to a particular place. Now, if you think that's a little bit silly with regard to worship and religion, I want to tell you there's an awful lot of very intelligent young people that come as students to Ole Miss, and they think that God is back home in Tupelo or Jackson or Dallas, and he doesn't live here. And so when they're at Ole Miss, they have a vacation from God, and then when they go back home or when they graduate, then he's waiting for them back in Atlanta or wherever. So we still believe this, that God is tied down to a particular place. But Rahab said, you know, I have this evidence, and I'm willing to say that your God is supreme, that he's real, and that he transcends time and place. And so I want to be on the right side with him. She mentions fear about 3 times here in what she says. You know, we don't like preachers to talk about hellfire and brimstone. When they start doing that, you know, we send a moving van to their house. But sometimes, particularly when our faith is quite young, that's a valid motivation. It shouldn't be our only motivation. And that's why, you know, we have John 3:16, for God so loved the world. For Christ's love compels us, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5. So we need to have a little bit more than fear long term, but, you know, fear is not a bad initial motivation. That's what Rahab says. She says, everybody around here is afraid, and I got to tell you, I think your God is real, and I think he can get it done. So the spies, they hang out there, and when they leave, she says, now don't go to the Jordan. They're looking for you there. You go up in the hills, wait 3 days, and then you can cross the Jordan and get back to your own people. That's what they do. They give the report. Joshua chapter 6, Joshua and the people all arrive, and they walk around the city, as we've already mentioned earlier today in our lesson. But the writer in verse 30 of Hebrews, we'll go back up to verse 30, it's on your sheet here. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. The whole account is in Joshua 6, and the writer there emphasizes that the reason they fell wasn't, acoustics, that they shouted so loud that it knocked the walls down. It wasn't because a certain tornado came out of the desert and knocked the place apart. It was because of their obedience to God's commands that must have seemed really strange to them, you know, marching around in silence. What's that going to do to the walls? Maybe we should build some siege work, some battering rams, some ramps or something, you know? Nope. He said, you do what I tell you to do, and it'll all work out. And so in faith, they obeyed. It's impossible to get through Hebrews 11 and then the additional commentary we run into in James chapter 2 without seeing the association between faith and obedience that you just can't break apart. It's like H2O makes water. You know, you pull the H off, you pull the O off, you don't have water. You got to have both of them there to make water. So you have to have faith and obedience, and these things are very, very closely knit together. So again, it's clear in reading in Joshua chapter 6 that Rahab and her family follow the instructions that the spies gave them. As the spies are leaving Rahab's house, they said, okay, Rahab, here's the deal. You've saved our lives, and we will save the life of you and whatever family members you want to save. You just tell them to come and stay inside your house while we assault the city. If you will tie this scarlet cord, this red rope that you used to let us over the wall, you tie this in your window. If you'll do that, then we'll save you. But understand this, anybody from your house that goes out in the street, they're going to get killed, and it's not our fault. We're only responsible for people that obey, that stay inside the house where the red rope is tied. Sometimes we think, well, you know, this thing about being baptized, that's a great symbol. It's a little legalistic, you know, it's work salvation. You know, Rahab could say, you know, your God is God in heaven above, earth beneath, and I have faith in him. Shouldn't he save me by faith? I mean, you know, isn't this a little legalistic? Suppose it's a blue cord instead of this red cord. Or suppose somebody just has to run outside really quick, you know, and then they forget to take their mask and their gloves into Kroger. Can't we just, you know, couldn't God just overlook that because of his grace or something? They said, here's the deal. It's real simple, Rahab. Stay inside the house, tie the red cord in the window, and you'll be safe. And so that's what happened, and they were safe, and they were delivered from the destruction of the rest of the city. Well, not to be overlooked, though, is Rahab's role in the big story. This is not the end of the story for Rahab, okay? It says they brought her out of the city, and she and her family became a part of the Israelite nation. The writer of Joshua said they're still with us today. They became a part of the Israelite nation. So if you want to know where else Rahab is in the Bible, you can just go to your computer Bible and do a word search with Rahab. And you're going to get confused because in the book of Job and Isaiah, Rahab is used to refer to a mythical sea monster. And he talks about God's power over everything, even the Rahab of the sea. And then in Psalms 87 and 89, it's kind of a disparaging nickname for the city of Egypt, kind of like we call, the United States of America Uncle Sam. Well, Rahab is used in that sense. There's no connection between the woman Rahab and these other two Rahabs, and you get confused here. Rahab, living in the ocean, what's this about? That's just something in the Bible to watch out for. But if you do a word search on Rahab, you're going to see that she's in Joshua 2 and 6, she's in Hebrews 11, and she's also in James 2, which is a great commentary, and that's on your sheet. But what's not on your sheet are two other places that we run into her in the Bible. And that is, I believe, in the book of Ruth. She's an ancestor of this character, Boaz. And then we read about her in Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Jesus. Now, there are only 4 women that are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. The rest of it's all the fathers. So-and-so was the father of so-and-so, was the father of so-and-so. But he pauses 4 times and he says, and oh, by the way, the mother was so-and-so. Now, remember, we said Rahab doesn't belong. She's a woman. She's a Canaanite, and she's a prostitute. What on earth? But here she is in a list of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. By God's grace, Rahab's faith just conquered all. She transcended her culture. She transcended her circumstances, and she became a hero of faith that God used to bring about the entry of Jesus Christ into our world, which here we are today in 2020, makes a mighty big difference in my life and your life. So thank goodness for Rahab. What a hero. Next week we're going to move on and talk about some other people that have some shady resumes but are still faith heroes from the book of Judges. So I hope you can rejoin us then.